Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And here we are at the end, in this case, the end of my review of this. So this is From the Earth to the Moon. We're going to be looking at the last 2 episodes of the 12 episode mini-series. We're going to be looking at episode 11, which is the original Wives Club, which talks about the astronauts' wives, and then the last mission to the moon. For now, anyway. So let's have a look at it. Yeah, I'm going to be looking at my computer. So let's jump here. So first come in here and I'm going to give you the information. These are the original wives. Now some of them are shown here in the show, though they do, and I am going to read off kind of what happened. So you have Renee Price, who was married to Scott Carpenter. He was one of, this is the Mercury 7, so they were divorced in 72. They were separated in 68. You had Trudy Olson, who was Gordon Cooper's wife. They divorced in 70. Let me have these. Annie Castor, who was John Glenn's wife. Of course, he went back to the moon, so they were married until his death until in 2016. Betty Moore, who was Gus Grissom's wife, of course, she was married until his death in 67. So she was one of the women who was shown in this episode because she lost her husband. You have Josephine Fraser, who was Wally Scara's wife. They were married until his death in 2007. Lois Brewer, who was Alan Shepard's wife, married until his death in 1998. So we just talked about Shepard recently in the last episode. Marjorie Looney, who was Dake Slayton's wife, who I don't remember because again we're not covering these guys. They divorced in 78. Jane Sharon, this is Neil Armstrong's first wife. They divorced in 1994. Neil Armstrong, of course, is the first of the group too. So they divorced in 94. Susan Bugby, this is Frank Borman's wife. They were married until his death in 2001. Jane Dubois was Pete Conrad's wife. They divorced in 1988. Marilyn Gildridge, this is Jim Lovell's wife. They were actually married until his death in 2023. I didn't realize he had just died. Patricia Hayes was Jim McDivitt's wife. They divorced in 89. Then we have Marilyn DeLay. She was shown because this is Elliot C's wife. So they married until his death in 66. Yeah, she was not happy about that. Frey Shoemaker was Tom Statford's wife. They divorced in 85. Pat Figgin, this is Ed White's wife. She was there, so they were married until he died in Apollo 1 in 67. If I remember, she's shown at the end of this episode where they talk about the wife. She actually committed suicide, sadly. So years later, you have Barbara White, which was John Young's wife. They divorced in 72. So that's the end of the new 9, as they called them. So these were the... Moved on to Buzz Aldrin's wife, Joan Archer. They divorced in 72. Bill Anders' wife, Valerie Horde. They were married until his death earlier this year. He actually died in 2024. I don't think he ever... Then you had Jean Martin, who was Charlie Bassett's wife. They were married until his death. He was one of the ones he died with Elliot C. And they do mention her. They died in the NASA T-38 crash, so it was her and Elliot C. It was him and Elliot C. You had Sue Rajsile. This is Alan Bean's wife. We just mentioned him in the last video. Well, they did not last very long. They divorced in 76, not too long after he got back from the moon. Apparently, she was not happy going from being married to from a astronaut to a painter. You have Barbara Archley, who was Gene Carnan's wife. They divorced in 81. A lot of divorces here, military pilot wives. Martha Horn was Roger B. Chaffee's wife. He was one of those who died in Apollo 1. Patricia Finnegan, who was Michael Collins' wife. They were married until her death in 2014. So this was the commander of Apollo 11. So then you had Lola Ella Igby, just says Walter Cunningham's wife. It just says divorce, doesn't say when. Harriet Hamilton, who was Don Eisel's wife. He was, looks like, apparently he was Peace Corps country director. Completely irrelevant. He was Apollo 7. So they were divorced in 68. So before they landed on the moon. Faith Clark, who was Theodore Freeman's wife. He died in 64, so he died in a crash. Richard F. Gordon Jr.'s wife, they divorced. He was Apollo 12. And then Rusty Stewart, Claire Whitfield, that was his wife. Again, divorced. He was, doesn't say which Apollo mission he was. I'm trying to think. I think he might have been 12. Ann Ort, who was David Scott's wife, they possibly divorced in 2000. Looks like he was Apollo 15. So that's what we'll be discussing shortly. And then Cliff Williams Jr., his wife Beth Largent, they were married until his death. So he must have one of the ones who died, because he died in 67. So he died in a plane crash. He never went to space. So those are the wives. So in this episode, you really do they look at a select ones. They do it through almost the lens of going back from showing a fashion show. And you see them. There's a lot of smoking as a warning in this one. There's a heck of a lot of these women smoking. You see a lot of Marilyn, what's her name? She's Lovell's wife. One of the last things you see of them is he's obviously left the space program. They're packing up and leaving. And he finds just a random drawer. It's like, and there's hospital bracelets. And he's like, where are these from? Oh, they're from where the kids had their tonsils at. He was like, what? When did this happen? She's like, you weren't here. You were working. And I think she said, it's like you were preparing. He was preparing for one of the Gemini missions. And she's like, I had to decide every day what portions of your life to tell you. That was my job. And then, of course, he says, thank you. And these guys were married until his death. So it was, one of the things it shows is they were terrified to tell their husbands anything, because they were working all the time, and afraid of causing them stress so they would lose flight status. Now, remember, most of these guys were military test pilots. Or non-military test pilots before that. So these women were used to not seeing their husbands, and they were used to them doing things that might kill them on a regular basis, which is possibly one of the reasons most of them divorced. I'm going to jump back to that. A lot of them divorced. Yeah, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, 16. 16 divorces among these guys. So, and then, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Well, let's not count the ones who died during the space program. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 stayed married, except for the few that, not counting the few that died in the course of the space program. So, yeah. But again, it was the personality of these guys. You have to say it. They were daredevils and risk takers. So, and during most of these women's early marriages, their husbands were working all the time, doing stuff that just might kill them in some cases. So it's you probably similar to regular military wives. The marriages rarely last. It's just the stress. And then when a lot of these guys came back, you got to imagine they literally in some cases have been to space and been to the moon. You have PTSD, you have depression in a time where mental health was not a thing. And that's of course what happened to some of these women. I mean, like I said, Ed White's wife committed suicide. God, that must have been traumatic. She lost her husband. It was depressing. Not to mention these women, on top of that, besides just being military, and it's shown, the press is after them. Not as bad as they can be now when celebrities, but the press, I mean, they were doing a lot of this under lights. And you got to think of the guys, the families of people on Apollo 13, Apollo 1, who the guys on Apollo 1 were killed. They had issues with Apollo 13. So it's got to be tough. And it does show them. It does show. You don't really see the children in this one all that often. But it was a strain on the marriages, and it's not really surprising. And it shows them how stressed they are. And there was one talk where the women are together. It's like, it's almost better to lose your husband than to divorce, because there's a protocol for when the husband dies, not so much when they divorce. Banging noises. I have 4 cats. Thankfully the child is asleep, and I think the panthers are attacking each other, because that's what they do. Now back to space. But yeah, you see a lot of smoking. You see a lot of the women talking. It's like divorce it's still not a big thing. It's the 70s. Not even sure birth control was legal yet. I'm not sure abortion was legal yet. It's not abortion. Well, it's not legal now. It's a different story. It's legal where I'm at, but it's not legal throughout the entire country. We're not going there. Not the place. Talking about space. So that is basically what you see. You would see a little bit of the space stuff, but not much. Most of it concentrates on the women talking to each other and doing a lot of smoking and drinking. I do believe Borman's wife realized she was an alcoholic and goes into rehab, and he brings her stuff. And he's like, I did not realize. And I do believe Borman and his wife remain married. Let me see if I can find Frank Borman. Borman. Yep. They were married until she died in 2021. So she obviously got better. So, and that it does show that. Frank Borman was he was the guy who was doing all the prep, one of the guys who was doing a lot of the prep work for the moon landings. And testing out everything and making sure everything worked. Kendra, get down from there. So, and they were the ones who went to the moon first. So it was their team who went and circled the moon and shown that it was, these guys who were checking Spider. That was the moon landers. Kendra, cat on a printer. So, all right. So the next and last episode in this was La Voyage dans la Lune, the voyage to the moon. And they intermixed this a little bit with them showing of this first feature film of supposed fictional people landing on the moon that took place at the dawn of cameras. So they but one of the things that you learn is this is the first scientist on the moon. So, and this was the last trip, and nobody was paying attention. I mean, you see them on the moon, but then it jumps to like the geologists and the people who were behind the scenes, and it's like you need to keep working, and we're not going to give you more time. You have a limited time to do this. This was again one of the where they're doing all the geology. You actually had a geologist. In fact, I'm going to pull up, because I didn't pull this up. Let us pull up Apollo 15. This was the 4th. Yes, the 9th crewed mission in the Apollo program, the 4th moon landing. Is this, or is this, no, I want Apollo 16. Wrong one. 16. Was this the last one? I'm trying to remember which one was this. May help it. Yeah, it's just telling me the last. So, I believe this was the 10th crewed mission. Extended. Yes, and Apollo 16, was this the last one? I believe it was. It was a... Double check the Apollo missions. I believe... I type in a PP. Oh, I can't spell. Let's see if Apollo 17. Yeah, never mind. Apollo 17, I messed up. Not Apollo 15. So this was the 11th and final mission. So that's what this one does. So the commanders on this one were Eugene A. Carn. He was his third, the commander, and last space flight. And the command module pilot was Ronald E. Evans, and then Harrison Schmitt. This was his only space flight. He was the, I believe he was the geologist. Yeah. American geologist and former NASA astronaut. So he was a geologist. He was the first scientist on the moon. And then his co-person was Eugene A. Carn. So these guys were the last ones on the moon. So this was 17. But it is an interesting thing because you have them talking. You see a lot of the same geologists that you saw when they were, in my previous episode, when they were doing Apollo 15, when they were doing the geology. And you have the same scientists, and they were very, very happy that they finally had a geologist on the moon. And they did find various different evidence of different things. They were looking for volcanoes on the moon. Kendra and Calico looking for trouble, because of course I do. But it is a very interesting thing because it is the last mission. And they have the film of they aged up their old reporter from the Apollo 13 episode, and he's like, at Apollo 11, everybody stood still. You could barely see anything. By Apollo 17, it had a clear color picture and nobody cared. And that's really kind of what happened. It's like once Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, we'd been there, done that. Nobody cared anymore, which is kind of sad. I mean, even I don't know. I would love to look more into these guys and these other Apollo missions and more of space flight. But again, it was a very interesting final episode. It jumps back and forth between the making of this movie, which does in fact star Tom Hanks, because of course he had to get in there. His wife Rita Wilson was in fact in here. She was one of the wives. In fact, I can't remember which wife it was, but she was one of the wives. I think she was one of the Apollo 15 wives. And they do show up periodically. Kendra, don't fight me. Vicious animal. She's 15, if you haven't watched my videos. And cranky. cranky, cranky, cranky. My beautiful, beautiful old calico. So, but yeah, and this movie going on where you have to have Tom Hanks in there and them talking about it and their actual mission and how they're being, it's like you need to stay on. But how people had forgotten about it. And that's Kendra, get down. Oh, vicious animal. I'll kick her out in a minute once I'm done with talking to you, dear people. But it was a very interesting episode. Now, on to news if people are not paying attention. Again, this is being filmed on the 13th of November 2024. We know what happened last week. We are getting back to the senile old man being president again. But he's not going to interfere with this. So what this is as of right now, the next mission to circle the moon, and this article was released probably most relatively recently. Yes, last updated was back in March. So, and I doubt things are going to change, or this would, not to mention this is NASA's website. So, as of right now, the Artemis program, that is the next. We had the Apollo, now we have Artemis. This is the most recent. They are now on target as of September of next year. That Artemis 2, the first crewed Artemis mission around the moon. And then on September of 2026, Artemis 3 is planned to land the first astronauts near the lunar South Pole. And then you have Artemis 6, the first mission to the Gateway Lunar Space Station, remains on track for 2028. So, we are returning to the moon. So, as of right now, unless this obviously changes, unless strange things happen, and no, I don't think the orange creature is going to change this because ego. So the Artemis 2 crew members are Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen, NASA astronaut Christina Koch, Victor Glover, and Reed Weissman. Walk out, basically, it's showing. These guys are the 4, rather than 3, which is the Apollo missions, who are scheduled to go to the moon. So, I'm going to see if I can jump in and open a new tab here and look at Artemis 2. So, Artemis 2 is the people to go around the moon. So, these guys, it looks like, again, there are 4. So, let's see, who on earth are they? Because I would like to know. So, the astronauts heading to, this looks like Artemis 2, though. Kendra. Yeah, this is still Artemis 2. So, these are the people going. Yeah, for Artemis 2 is the first test flight, first mission under the Artemis program. Kendra. Trying to get into the closet. I'll have to get her out in just a minute. So again, these are the people who are headed back to the moon. So this looks like, yeah, these are the Artemis. They're heading back to the moon. So that's in 2025. These guys are the ones who are going to go back around the moon. The next to land on the moon, let's look at Artemis 3 here. Is it announced? Who on earth is it? It's planned for 2026. Is it going to tell us, have they made the decision? Possibly not. Though I'm sure maybe they have already, I'm sure they've already got, they're just not announcing it yet, who they're planning to send. And they probably won't announce it until the other ones go. So, but that's our current plans. So hopefully I will be back here sometime next year, and I will talk about the rare news subject of us going back to the moon, which will be, it'll be interesting. It really wasn't that long ago that we landed on the moon. In talking to my husband, I think I mentioned last minute, my mother would have been 12. She would have been turning 13 that year. My father would have been 19. He would have been turning 20. Meanwhile, both my in-laws would have had children. So my half-sisters-in-laws would have been very, very small when we landed on the moon. I think my husband's sister from his mother would have been about 2. So I'm trying to think. I think it was just the 2 eldest. They would have been little, but they were alive when, and that means, yeah. Let me do calculations here. How old they were when we landed on the moon. Time to find out when they were born. Doing some calculations. So my oldest sister-in-law was born in 66. So she would have been 3. That means his other sister would have been 2. And the other one wouldn't have been born yet, I don't think. No, she would have been born that year. So she would have been a newborn. They would have been alive, which is kind of interesting to me. That my sisters-in-law would have been alive when the moon landed. And then, of course, my mother was 12. Which, of course, yeah, my husband's actually not that much older than me. Only 4 years. But his parents are a decent age. My father-in-law is currently 80. And my mother-in-law is only a couple years younger. My dad is actually the same age as one of my husband's aunts, Kendra. And then my mother was obviously much, much younger. She was born in 56. My dad was born in 49. So, but that is it for this video. Check out the rest of the channel. This is the last of these space videos. You're also watching books on Diwali. I will be working on my mysteries for December. So this will be finishing up. Actually, no, you guys are done with Diwali. I am doing mysteries. I am getting to those. So those are set up, and I'm working for fairy tales in this coming year. So if you want to escape from the chaos or whatever the heck's going to be happening in the next in 2025, I'm going to be covering a bunch of fairy tales, and I'll be revisiting Cinderella. You can visit some of my fairy tales. I already did a review of Cinderella as well as Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast was this year. I'm going to look back on Cinderella next year, along with Frozen and Little Mermaid and all sorts of things, because my kid's really into fairy tales and Disney princesses. So we're gonna go with that. So like and subscribe. Check out the rest of the channel. I have plenty to look at, and see you next time. Thank you.